could change in 10 years if more people were like, if this was in mainstream education, permaculture design, if this was in mainstream education at every school, how could society
I'll tell you why that
change?
will never happen first.
Mm-hmm.
It will never
Okay, so
happen.
you are a little bit pessimistic.
No. I'll tell you why it will never happen is because the education system is built in order to support the capitalistic model that we live in. And in order for the capitalistic model to work, we need to be disconnected from the repercussions of our actions. So, you know, so when someone says, or when, okay, I don't want to get into certain politics, but
just to get the pessimism out, we're lucky that we have like all these growing Montessori schools and the Waldorf schools, which
you look
are
at how much pressure they're under. You look at how the right-wing governments of the world are really putting them under pressure to, you know, to somehow conform, because the world, in order to keep the system going, you need people who see, you know, who are so indoctrinated into seeing the world a particular way, and not to be able to think something through so that they can see the repercussions of their actions. So therefore, they will open-heartedly just do the work, thinking it's the right thing to do. They genuinely, you know, they genuinely think it's good for them. But what you find is a lot of people are like, well, actually, I can feel this. There's something wrong with this. I can't quite work it out, but it just doesn't feel right. But this is what I've spent 12 years studying to be this, and this is now my life. This is my livelihood. This is who I am. I'm defined by this. I'm in this box, and this is who I am, and I don't know how to break out of it. And they can see what they're doing is not necessarily coherent with a really beautiful world, but they kind of have to fit in because they can't see an alternative. So what permaculture is that alternative. It is a way. So permaculture is not about growing food. Let's be straight here. Permaculture is not about growing food. It's about understanding the world and having patterns and processes and principles and design methodologies for how to understand the world, how to understand what really makes the world alive, what really makes it vibrant, and so that we can then start looking at the systems of how we meet our human needs, including food. How do we design those systems in a way that's really coherent with a really abundant world for all of us? So we can apply the same principles we apply to growing food. We can apply it to building our houses, to building our economies, how we do our transportation, how we make our medicines, how we have a sense of purpose, what fulfills us, what makes us feel like really, wow, I really enjoy being alive because I am. And invariably, what really makes people feel alive and really joyful is service work, helping someone else. And seeing someone else's eyes light up when you show them, oh, look, this plant, I can make soap from it. Look, here, I'll show you how. And then you see that person, 5 minutes later showing someone else, and you think, I helped that person. And look, and this is what really makes people feel alive, is helping others. It's not money. It really is, invariably money just gives you a short-term kind of high, but but genuinely being there, being in a community, being in society, and being of service to society is what you see people really fills their hearts. So how to make designs so that happens. So again, going back to the kind of children and youth, if we can kind of instill that mentality in them, and so that they really genuinely see the world that way, then they can understand how to navigate the education system in a way that doesn't brainwash them into just being another corporate cog that destroys and depletes the world, that exploits the world. But they can use it intelligently to actually transform some of these industries, to transform some, and this is where the change will come. And once once the majority of people's minds have changed in terms of, for me, a lot of it is this kind of colonial kind of mindset of control over nature, control over people, control over. Once we start changing that and actually seeing how much cooperation just brings so much more joy and so much more benefit than control over, so control over nature, control over this plant can grow because it's, bees will be attracted to it, and I like bees. That can't grow because it's bindweed, or it's Japanese knotweed, or it's, that's a bad plant. This insect can come because it's a bee. I like bees, they all pollinate. This insect can't. It's a cockroach, or an aphid or something. And this selective approach to nature, without taking elements out of nature, creates an imbalance. And then you'll end up, well, and then you have all these problems, you have all these pests, because you've destroyed nature, you've created an imbalance. And now you're, if we look at modern food growing, 80-90% of the work you put into modern food growing is actually to stop nature doing what she wants to do. So, and using pesticide to kill pests, herbicide to kill herbs, and all this deathly energy that is brought to the food growing, to a food which is supposed to give you life. You're using death to produce something that gives you life, and then you're surprised you have cancer. Really? With all these pesticides and all these chemicals that's going in your food, and the lack of nutrients that are in your food, your body doesn't, our ancestors had access to food from 2,000 different families of plants. Modern humans, in the so-called developed nations, should we say, 80-90% of all their food comes from 6 families of plants.
Wow.
Boom, we've narrowed down our dietary, what we can get in terms of physical food. Obviously, there's more things that feed us than just physical food, but we've really narrowed it down. That our food growing systems there's no life in the soil. And so how is the life going to get into the plant that you're then going to eat? There's no energy in it. There's no life force. It's just a commodity. Chuck it down, it will process, and therefore you need a lot more food to actually eat in order to get the minerals that you need, because there's no minerals in it.
Exactly. There are studies that the nutrients are getting lost. But you yourself grew up in a city. How can someone just on a tiny space in a city do something like maybe with micro herbs, or how could they apply the principles of permaculture?
So what I was saying is, once you start creating an ecosystem that works with nature and has a lot of nutrients and has life in the soil, when you eat that food, you need to eat a lot less, because every time you eat, you get nutrient dense foods, and therefore you need to eat a lot less food than most other people, or that you were before if you were buying food. And therefore it takes, first of all, it takes a lot less energy for your body to process it. Therefore you have a lot more energy left for life, for living, for, if you sleep more than 5-6 hours a day, if you wake up groggy, if you can't go to the toilet straight away, if, these are all signs that something's imbalanced. And so then we can start looking at, well, why is it imbalanced? What's causing that imbalance, and how do we bring that balance back again? And one of the ways is through nutrient dense foods. So you're eating a lot less, you process less food, and therefore you need less energy. Therefore you have more energy for living and for health and well-being. And so I can actually, so for example, during COVID, I very rarely spend time in the UK. Most of my time I'm traveling, and so I hadn't, and my parents passed away. I designed a forest garden for them before I even knew what permaculture was, before I knew what forest gardening was, but just because it was logical to build. I started looking at, my parents were getting older, and every time they would dig, and they loved gardening, they loved growing food, they loved watching nature, they loved watching the squirrels and the hedgehogs and the birds and what have you. And so I thought, how can I allow them to have that experience without them having to put in the work? So I understood and looked at what the work was, and how does nature do that work instead of them. And so that's what I created. Later on, I found out about permaculture. Later on, I found out about forest gardening. It's like, well, okay, that's what I've just done. And so for me, it's just common sense. It's really obvious to do that. But then when they passed away, the place was more or less abandoned. And so no one had touched this garden for 7 years. And then over COVID, I was forced to come back to England. So I came back to this house, and 80% of my food came from this garden that was abandoned for 7 years. And it's just a family back garden. It's not a big, huge space. It's not, it's less than 100 square meters. And 80% of my food came from here because of how it was designed to work with nature. The other 20%, 15% came from foraging, just going to wild spaces and just picking wild foods. And the other 5% just stuff that was already in the kitchen, that was already on the shelves. And so yeah, you don't need a huge space. You just need to rethink food. You need to rethink what food actually is and what kind of diet. If you want to grow pumpkins and tomatoes and carrots and potatoes and all that, then yeah, you're going to need that much space, because they would not survive. Most of these things are not native, apart from carrots, but then carrots were cultivated to be what they are. If you look at what the wild carrot looks like compared to what the modern day carrot
They had different colors, didn't they? But the Dutch chose orange, and then they just let the orange carrots survive, right?
Almost. The other part of the story is actually it was the French that massively. So the orange, the Protestants would carry their orange carrots as a kind of secret to kind of say, hey, this is, you're also growing orange carrots. Oh, okay, maybe it's safe to talk. And so wherever they went, they took their orange carrots. But it was the French who went crazy for orange carrots. And they're the ones who cultivated thousands and lots of different varieties. Whereas, even though it started in England, the first crossbreeding of things came in England to actually take the wild carrot, which is white, to being what it is now. So yeah, it had everything from black, really long, 2-meter long carrots where you could only pull the first 30 centimeters and the rest would stay in the ground. It was too soft, to so you had all kinds of different variations as they kept crossbreeding them. So they eventually ended up with a certain size, but then they were different colors. They were everything from white, yellow, red, orange, down to a kind of purple, to a really,
like
really
a
almost
burgundy,
black.
right?
Yeah,
a burgundy, I think, like burgundy tone.
exactly. So it's really such a broad range of colors, which that's what the British then took to their colonies, which is why when you go to India, they still have all of those colors.
Oh,
It never died out. It was only because the British, when the French started growing orange carrots, and everyone's saying, and then the British being snobs, they were kind of, oh, well, if the French are growing that, we should also grow orange carrots only. And so in England, the other colors died out and only the orange, whereas in their colonies, they carried on. They didn't have this snobbery around French cuisine. So they carried on growing the orange carrots. But all the other things, potatoes from Abiyala, what the decolonialized name for the Americas. So the Americas is the colonialist name for that region. Abiyala is what the indigenous peoples want to know their continent as. And so so potatoes from Abiyala, corn from Abiyala, chilies, peppers, Abiyala, many of these things are not native to Europe. And so in order to grow those things, tomatoes, all those things, if we try to grow them, and many of them not even from this kind of climate. So the tomatoes, for example, in the kind of tropical parts of Abiyala grow just like grapevines. They are permanent. They are, perennial plants. And so you don't have to plant them as an annual. But here, the seasons are so different, which is why you have to put so much work and effort into growing them.